All right, hello everyone, and welcome to Boston University's webinar, Top Talent in Fundraising and Philanthropy. I'm Sarah, and I'll be moderating today's session alongside our team of panelists. And through conversations with our experienced team, we'll shortly share their insights and tips on career paths, networking, interviewing, and hiring trends. You'll gain a better understanding of the field's opportunities and practical strategies to succeed. We'll also make time to just address your questions throughout the session and at the end of the presentation. And today's webinar is being recorded, so please expect a link to be sent to your email for reference tomorrow following the session to share with your colleagues as well. Okay, I'd now like to introduce our panel, but I'll start first with John Shafra, the Professional Fundraising Program Director and today's host. And John serves as the Director of Development and Strategic Initiatives at the Harvard Business School and has spent just many years in alumni engagement, annual funds, volunteer management, major gifts, and many more areas. And our panel for today. We'll start with Neda, and Neda is the Director of Development at Boston University's Questrom School of Business, where she leads a team of fundraisers charged with securing philanthropic support for the strategic priorities and core activities of the school. With many years of prior experience at other higher education institutions, such as Harvard Business School and Northeastern University, Neda is also an instructor for the BU online fundraising certificate program. And Adele. Adele is the co-founder and managing partner at Pearl Street. Adele brings nearly 30 years of innovative leadership in executive search to her role. Highly skilled in strategic marketing and business development, she began her search career implementing programs that support new market entry and practice expansion before assuming a search portfolio of CEO and vice president level engagements on behalf of Fortune 500 and venture or private equity companies. And Keith Brown is the Director of Development for the Immunization Partnership, which is a nonprofit organization with the mission of being advocates for disease prevention and promoting education and evidence-based public policy on the health benefits of childhood and adult vaccinations. Keith is a senior level organizational leader with over 15 years of success in million-dollar fundraising revenue in both traditional nonprofit and faith-based environments. Okay, and with that introduction, I'll now turn it over to John to start our discussion.
Sarah, and thank you everyone for being here. And it wouldn't be a Zoom or GoToWebinar if someone wasn't having difficulties. So Teresa will likely try to join us shortly as well. But first of all, I want to say welcome to everyone. Thank you for coming and joining this, this discussion today. The work of nonprofits is increasingly important in society that we live in. We often fill in important gaps where there's a need for advocacy and education and health, and to have people coming together to learn about how to be and thrive as professionals in this industry is just incredibly inspiring to me. So thank you to those who are here and to those who are listening to this later. So we'll jump in. We have an esteemed panel here today, and I really am appreciative of all those who joined us, Adele, Keith, Neda, Teresa, when she gets on, to talk about sort of this from a couple of different perspectives. We have some folks here who have just gone through searches and have ended up in new positions in the last year. We have folks who hired in the fundraising philanthropy space, and our own recruiter as well, who has a different perspective too. So maybe I'll start with Adele maybe. So if you were to think a little bit about sort of trends or things that you're seeing, maybe you can help sort of set the stage a little bit for what you're seeing out there in the professional fundraising field.
Definitely. It has been an interesting past 3 years, unlike what I have experienced in the last 15 of working inside of advancement and development. So the pandemic shifted the paradigm a little bit with fundraising roles. And there was a crop of fundraisers that decided to leave the industry for whatever reason, retirement, a change in direction. And that left room for folks to start moving up. And so there has been a huge set of open positions at what I would consider, I don't want to say entry-level positions, but positions that are focused on maybe entry-level gifts, 4 or 5-figure gifts. So there, especially in higher ed, there are a ton of positions that are open at that level. And universities in particular have used promotions as a way to retain talent. So as everyone is kind of moving up in organizations, that's leaving some spots for people to enter in. I also think that because of the pandemic and some organizations having hiring freezes, there's some pent-up demand for fundraising talent. So there is a whole slew of open positions that organizations are anxious to hire. And because we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel from these last 3 years, folks are starting to think about campaigns. So a lot of organizations and universities are going into a planning mode for their next comprehensive or capital campaign. And so they're adding staff to their team. So it has been, dare I say, a recession-proof sector to be in and around fundraising. And I think it's only going to grow stronger as we look at the next year.
Well, that's super helpful. So I'm glad we're all here. Maybe just a quick sort of follow up on that. In terms of where you're seeing sort of some of that opening at sort of the little bit more of the entry point into the field, how are you seeing people come in from other areas with transferable skills, or looking to have work for more mission-driven organizations?
It's a great question, and it's one that my clients are always batting around because it's the path of least resistance to bring someone in who's been there, done that, and has a few years of experience. But I think a lot of organizations are now open to, let's bring in talent, period. So if you have a strong background in project management, you could start as a development associate. If you've had a background in sales, business development, marketing, all of these fundraising roles are going to make sense. We can connect the dots from what you've done to what we're looking for in this role. And it's really just, I think of myself moving from technology recruiting to nonprofit recruiting. It's just learning a new vocabulary, but your skill set is it's still going to play.
And maybe, Keith, if I could bring you in here a little bit. I know you started a new role about 10 months ago, but maybe share a little bit of sort of how you got thinking about that, and then how the steps you sort of took to get into this new role.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I came from the faith-based organization, and I was looking for what that next career path would be. So I looked to fundraising. So you're all right. I mean, as I started looking at fundraising, I'm like, how can I transfer my skill set over there to fit in a position in fundraising? When you think about it, a faith-based organization or church in particular, we do fundraising every week. We ask for offerings, but to have that translate over into the fundraising in a traditional nonprofit, I started looking at job descriptions, trying to find out what it was that they would be looking for. And so I took my skill sets, if you would, and translated them into something that was relevant in the fundraising environment. So it was a little different. When I started looking at the field, I was getting a little discouraged. Here it is, just coming out of the pandemic, was getting a little discouraged. I was hearing a lot of people leaving the industry, didn't know all of the details as to why. So it really was kind of a scary thing to even look at the industry. But I was encouraged once I found out just what the job descriptions were and the skill sets that I had and how I could translate those over into nonprofit. And we'll maybe talk about it later, but just some of the some of the methods that I use to help me get connected, because it's tough just putting applications in, saying, hey, I've been a preacher all this time and now I want to go into fundraising. You know, the resumes don't make it, okay? They won't make it through the cut. So yeah, so I had to be creative and making sure that I could at least get to the people to at least share those skill sets. So that's kind of what, I mean, the field is great. When I studied it, it's a great profession, but a lot of people just don't understand it.
And any, I mean, I will, so can you pull out any trick or anything you use to sort of build that network or sort of get in there with some folks to be noticed?
Was that to me? I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, sorry, Keith, just follow up.
Yeah, so let me share with you what I ended up doing. I actually got a little help because when I started the process, I realized that networking the way it used to be done wasn't being done that way. Because of COVID, we weren't able to go and rub shoulders with folks face to face. And I found out about this little tool called LinkedIn. So I got this organization to actually help me build a page because I didn't even have a page. So in March of last year, I finally got connected to LinkedIn and found out this was the premier platform for networking. And so I started connecting. The goal that I was told was I needed to get to 500 connections because then the algorithms change when it comes to people looking at you saying, oh, okay, well, he's connected. And so I started at 0. And I'll tell y'all, I'm over 700, but the process there I was going through was just calling out to people that I knew. Because it's like, how do I build this from nothing? So I went through my email address, the email addresses that I had, and started looking for people that I knew that was on LinkedIn and just started reaching out to them. You know, hey, I haven't seen you in a while, would like to connect with you. And so that's how I started building it. And then to get to where I wanted to go, every time you connect to someone, then you get access to their connection. So a lot of the people that I knew had 500 or more connections. So then I could start searching after I decided I wanted to go into the fundraising business, looking for organizations that I'd go onto people's profile and see if they knew anybody in those companies. And that's really how I infiltrated. It's sort of like a reverse engineering. And so if I seen that they knew someone there, I'd say, hey, I realize you know somebody at company XYZ. How well do you know them? Oh, they're my friend. Could you just get me an introduction? And now it was that simple. And so I started going around I started going a different method instead of doing applications, because like I said, my resume would not pass all of these systems that they have. So I started going directly to people. So I use networking as the way to get connected. And that's how I really found the job that I have now. I picked out companies. I found people in positions. I emailed them and said, I'd like to just connect with you on LinkedIn and be a networking partner. Can we have a conversation? And that's really how I did it. You know, a little tougher than what most people would have to do. But when you talk about, you just mentioned people coming from different backgrounds to get into the fundraising business. And for me, because the level that I was trying to come in at, because of what I had been doing, I wanted to change, but I couldn't afford to come in at an entry level. So I had to be a little more creative to make sure I was coming in at an executive level. So for me, it was a little, I had to be a little more clever. I would say and would encourage anyone getting out of school or wanting to change careers to use that as well, because I've discovered in the business in this short period of time that I have been able to connect with funders, finding people on boards of directors, a board of directors of different funders that I didn't have access to. So the same networking process that I used to get connected to get a job is the very same process that I'm using to connect with funders and find individuals. Yeah.
No, that's great, Keith. And I'm going to go out on a not too far limb and say probably many of our attendees are familiar with LinkedIn, but it's actually incredibly illustrative and a good reminder to me to hear from the ground. You know, many don't have the opportunity to look at sort of a blank slate to sort of start this process at the same time you're starting a job search, and just sort of the thoughtfulness of making those connections, the intentionality of, you know, connecting with those that you're connected to with purpose and clarity. And I think, you know, one of the tidbits I would give is, I think for many, your network on LinkedIn has become so bloated that you actually don't know, you know, people email you about a contact and you actually don't know who they are. And so I've noticed a trend of people really going through and trying to refine their networks so that when someone reaches out to them, they can actually be helpful, and sort of likewise. So Keith, that was really, really illustrative and a good reminder to all of us. Neda, you've been sort of in the field and built a wonderful career in fundraising, and you're a professional that I have had the great opportunity to work with in my past as well, who I have a lot of respect for. But you also recently made a switch, and you made a switch to sort of a big time job. And I'd be interested to hear a little bit about how did you know you were ready to make a move? And how did you sort of begin to open up your perspective on what type of job and what type of institution?
First, thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this discussion. I really appreciate it, and it's always so fun to see all these great faces. In terms of my career, unlike Keith, I was not pivoting. I was actually moving within, sort of moving up. And interestingly enough, for me, I think because I had the career, I had the contacts in the field, it was slightly different. I wasn't really kind of going through. First of all, I took a lot of care not to apply to lots of jobs. Actually, I did the opposite. I invested a lot of time in talking and getting to know the organizations and researching the organization, because at this point of my career, what was really important for me was room to grow and the feeling that I was in a culture that was going to invest in me. That was the biggest driver for me. And that's very like fuzzy. No job description tells you that. That's information you only get from talking to people that work in an organization. So a little bit like Keith, I did go in on a limb and sort of search for people from organizations once I saw a job description that was interesting, to see who I knew or how many degrees of separation I was from an organization. But I also went back to even my old, people that I had worked with early in my career, because our careers are long. We all go through so many, we weave in and out of organizations. And when I go back, some of the people that I started with are now at very interesting places that I had lost track of. So I did also do a lot of discovery in my LinkedIn and reconnected. Took the opportunity to reconnect, but to have those very pointed conversations about, how do you feel working there? Do you get a lot of pushback if you want to go to a conference? Like that simple, if you want to participate in some professional development activity, are they supporting that? Etc. It was a lot of those kinds of questions. And for that, I did not care that you were in fundraising or not. I cared about what your experience as an employee. So I talked to people from all roles, not just advancement, actually. So it became a little bit of a quest for much more focus on the fit, and yes, being a little bit more targeted with my LinkedIn, but also unexpectedly open to talking to people outside of advancement and just wanting to hear what they had to say.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, one of the things that I love about this field is that we have professional contacts, but there's also many in our lives who are connected with different organizations, an alma mater, somewhere where they were, received cancer treatment, a nonprofit that they are donors to, and you can really connect in many different ways, which isn't necessarily true in all industries. Mm-hmm. Neda, talk to me a little bit about so once you sort of started in the process, what, with a long career and a lot you've done, what parts of your work or yourself did you highlight in that process to just ensure that you were moving forward and getting a good look?
So I think talking to a little bit to speaking to the point that Adele made, I have noticed it used to be that you had to you kind of had to pay your dues in development. You had to go annual giving, then maybe leadership giving, or there was this sort of 14 stations to the cross kind of approach to development. And first, I've been so inspired. The younger generations are not going that approach. They're not. And I'm like, good for you. I'm excited about the fact that I think, like Adele mentioned, there's an openness to different skills set. So I had a lot of there was interest in my experience, but I ended up having a lot of conversations about me as a problem solver, or me as working with an organization and kind of building relationships and partnerships, and a lot of soft skill that was internal, not external. It was actually, perhaps it was because of the assumption that I had already the piece of working with donors or prospects, but it was about how to navigate a really complicated place and making sure that they're gonna have someone that actually is gonna be positive about it, is gonna be good to work with, and sort of can-do attitude, and somebody that will problem solve, And I think that's a little bit different from the past, and that was the focus of a lot of my conversations. In a way, not that different from somebody that would come, that I'm interviewing right now for 2 positions, in frontline positions, and I want to hear about problem solving. I want to hear about digital communications experience, social media experience, marketing, all these things that had not necessarily to do with annual gifts, sort of major gifts, etc., the traditional categories. I want to hear about competencies and about styles, and working in teams and collaboratively, and that's much more important.
No, that's great. I mean, I think this is far too thin of a limb to go on, so I won't really go there. But I do have some sense that the days of the hired gun in development are maybe moving behind us, whether it be for specifically a campaign, which I feel like that is, the context we always use. But I think the days of bringing someone in who just can, make it rain, as they used to say, and all that sort of stuff, I think have moved on. So being sure that you're showing up in interviews and in these conversations on your resume as a whole person with a whole set of skills that, highlighting obviously the job function and the things that you're going to need to do, but also just how you'll be a part of the team. And again, with the flexibility of hybrid and sort of where and how people work, there's also sort of a flexibility and skill sets there too. I'm going to try to bring our colleague Teresa Lee into the conversation. Teresa is the Chief Development Officer at New England Botanic Garden at Tower Hill, and has held a number of leadership roles in development over the years, from Boston College to UMass to many other places. Teresa, can you hear us?
I can, and I'm sorry I'm not on camera.
That's okay. Your wisdom is worth it however we can get it. So thank you so much for being here. Teresa, I was hoping I could throw it to you. I know you've been doing some hiring over the past year, and would just love to hear your perspective as you're, the one on the other side of some of these resumes. What are you looking for? What sort of gets you excited to bring someone in and start a conversation, knowing that it takes a lot of time to have these interview conversations?
Great question, and I'm really interested in hearing about Nada's and Keith's experience because I am on the other side of that. And what I'm looking for, first you get the piece of paper. It's amazing to me, even though a cover letter is requested and required, how few people write a cover letter. And I love to see a good cover letter to explain anybody's transitions from one field to the next, or their transitions from one organization to the next. You know, tie it together and tell your story so that I don't have to do the work on my end of maybe presuming what I think is happening with you. I think it's a great opportunity to present yourself and your story. And so many cover letters are so bland. I think it is an opportunity to really be creative and tell a story, and especially when it comes to the soft skills. The other thing that I'm looking for, and I just went through a hiring process that surprised me, is we had 2 candidates, 2 finalists, and one, the resume read like a job description, which does not interest me at all. And the other, you know, it had the job description in there somewhere, but it talked about accomplishments. And I once hired somebody for a frontline fundraising role at Boston College who had no experience in fundraising, but everything he touched turned to gold. He was the coach of a swimming team, and he said over a 10-year period, I took him from last to first. He had put on the youngest performance of a Broadway show, and these things have to be registered apparently, so he knew it. He did Les Mis with elementary school kids, which I thought was unusual. And I thought, wow, this is somebody who everything he does really, really well. I want to know more about him. And it turned out he is a fantastic fundraiser. So I do look more past your actual experiences, especially when I was in a bigger shop. I had a little bit more leeway and time to train people. In a smaller shop, I'm sorry to say, I can't be as creative because I have one of each person and I need them to hit the ground running with me.
No, that's really interesting. And you know, that juxtaposition between small shop, big shop, I'll pull, and this probably might be rubbing off a few cobwebs, but when you were in a bigger shop, how did you help get your colleagues on board with maybe taking a little bit of a different approach to who the person is you were trying to hire, assuming there was a group who was involved, and assuming that I've never been in one of those meetings where everyone's giving feedback and it's really narrow in terms of what everyone's looking for. But any insight into that, Teresa?
Yeah, I think going into it, you need to, as a group, whatever group you're assembling as a search committee, decide what those characteristics are and if the candidate meets them or not. And if you're not doing that going in, it can get really tricky midway, because we've all been in the room where, and I just had this experience, it wasn't my hire. Hey, what does everybody think? And the first person to speak is really going out on a limb because they may be in disagreement with the rest of the group, which is what happened. And I've been that person. We went around, you know, the first 2 people said, oh, really like him, really like him. And I thought, I see a change every 2 years over a 20-year period. That concerns me. And the person ended up getting hired and still at the institution probably about a good 12 years later. So what do I know? But yeah, you never really know. But I also like to do my homework beyond what the candidate gives me. If I know people who know them and I think I can do that in confidence, I might reach out, or I just Google them, or I look at their LinkedIn or anything I can find, really. Because, you know, we're all putting our face forward in the best way we know how, but there's more to people, as Neda was talking about. I want to know the whole person, and I often ask questions that get well outside the job. And I really want to know, like, how do you think? Who are you? How do you make decisions? How do you problem solve? That's much more interesting to me. I can teach people things. I recently hired somebody here who was a volunteer, and she fit in so well to our team. Everybody came to me and said, why don't you just hire her? You're looking for a full-time. I said, well, she can only do part-time, but it's worked out beautifully. And I'm having to teach her, but she is a very fast learner. And most importantly, she has such a positive attitude. Everybody wants to be around her. So I don't care that she doesn't know about annual giving. She's learning fast.
That's fantastic to hear, Teresa, and super inspiring, because I know there are so many individuals, particularly as you might be trying to get in the field, either actively or passively, who take on a volunteer role to try to build some experience and make some of those connections. And it does, there's still an important part of the culture and hiring manager that's willing to sort of take some of those steps with someone who might not have the experience, even though they're clearly dedicated on it. That's really great to hear. So I want to go to Adele, but Neda, do you just want to add in any comments? You said you're sort of doing a search right now. How are you real time? How are you sort of approaching that?
Definitely broader in terms of paying a lot of attention to profiles that include even business development experience, sales, financial services even. There's a lot of people pivoting for very, very different reasons. And so I am really keeping an eye open for those competencies, not just sort of the strict fundraising path, the straightforward. To your previous point though, John, rain is still important. To make it rain, it's still important. But rain once is one thing. To make an organization that's going to be raining for a while, that's what I'm going for. And I think that's the piece that's a little bit different. But yeah, in terms of the search, again, totally cover letters. People don't write cover letters that actually tell the story, that highlight their competencies. And also, actually, I still pay a lot of attention to personal referrals. That's huge, 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 huge. And at least maybe it's a leftover from our field, but your integrity, your personality, your values come through those relations. That it's important to get that information. And whenever I see a resume through the door, I will check who may know you, and just to learn a little bit more.
Yeah, and then that's a great thing to highlight in terms of, again, this a little bit unique maybe to this field, true across lots of fields, but the relationships that you build in all different contexts are so important. And we all know this. We all know not to burn bridges, and we know, all that sort of stuff. But there's also sort of some sort of passive neglect to relationships that, that it definitely, when you're being hired into a job that's very much, as Keith mentioned, he's using all those relationships now to do the job. It's, especially looked at. You're not being hired in to do a job that you're sitting at a computer by yourself working on code or something of that nature. Adele, can I go to you? I would love, it's a great opportunity to have you here. We talked about how people do their network search and they're on LinkedIn and doing that, but also there's an opportunity sometimes to have a great person like yourself reach out as a recruiter and sort of say, hey, this is something that I'd like to run by you. Can you sort of demystify for us a little bit on how you sort of figure out, how you build these pools of candidates and what you're looking for and how what your approach is there?
Definitely happy to. This is like that old show of like unlocking the magician's secrets, right? And
Exactly.
this is how I saw the lady in half. Candidate. So when an organization is looking to fill a position and they reach out to a search firm, they usually do that because they don't have the capacity to run the search themselves. You just heard Neda and Teresa talk about, they're reviewing resumes, they're going through this process on their own. Some organizations have an opportunity to offload that onto a search firm. And if you indulge me for a second, I think it is helpful to know that there are two different kinds of recruiters that are out there. One kind is referred to as contingency recruiting, and they are the larger staffing agencies. So the Robert Halfs, the Adecos, the Randstad. They work with the person who's looking to find a job, and they will take your resume and they will bring it to organizations and say, hey, I know John. Look at his background. You might have a place for him. And as with most things in the business world, it comes down to money. A contingency recruiter is paid when you, as the candidate, are hired in a job. The other side of that, the other end of that spectrum is the retained search. And thinking about the nonprofit and fundraising world, this would be the Lindauers, Aspen Leadership Group, Pearl Street, where we are connected to the hiring manager and we are working with them to understand what are the competencies that you're looking for, what is this role, who will this role interact with, what do we need this person to do, what does success look like? And then we go out, and there are two ways that we use to develop a candidate pool. One is by posting job ads and having people apply, and we get to review the resume and that cover letter. But we're also making a really targeted list of people that we are going to reach out to. So I work with a researcher, and I might say, okay, we have a position at BU. It's going to be a director of annual giving. Let's look at other universities, similar size, smaller, larger, but let's look at who would be an appropriate person for us to call, and we're going to introduce them to the role. And if you think of driving down the highway, you've got 3 lanes. Slow, the medium, the fast, right? And people are weaving in and out, and you're going at different speeds at different times. But as long as you're inside those guardrails, you're within limit. So running a search is very much like that as candidates come forward. You're going to have candidates in different lanes. We might be looking for 5 to 7 years of experience in fundraising. Well, some people will show up with 2 years of fundraising, but they've been raising, maybe they happen to be in a spot where they're raising 7- and 8-figure gifts in those first 2 years. That becomes interesting to a hiring manager. Maybe it's someone who's on the tail end of their career and wants to have kind of that crowning jewel and says, you know what, I know you're looking for someone that only has 5 to 7 years. I've got 20, but I'd love to do this job anyway. And along the way, it is a learning exercise for the hiring manager. They are figuring out, of the individuals they meet, what's resonating for them, personality-wise, skill set-wise, and then the search is going to advance from there. And I think it does become frustrating when you are working with a recruiter, or if you're working directly with HR or a hiring manager, because as the candidate, you are wondering, who else is out there? What's my competition look like? What do you really think of me? I went in for those interviews. You told me I did great. What does that mean? What do I need to know for the next time if these conversations continue? And I think, and we might touch on this later, but there's inside of that is the reason why you should talk to recruiters and get to know who's out there and build relationships, because you have to figure out who you can trust and who is in this for you, who will take the time to appreciate your situation, your household, your priorities, your salary requirements. And even though we work for the hiring manager, we're able to represent you as well and try to find a win-win in that scenario. Does that come close to answering that question, John?
Oh, right on. No, that's really helpful. And who should take your call? Is it someone who's just ready to go and look at a new job right now, or I feel like sometimes there's hesitation there. What would you say to that?
You should talk to the recruiter every single time, even if it's to size them up in 5 minutes and to figure out, do I want this person in my network 2 to 5 years from now? Have the conversation. You'll find out, even if you're not looking, you're going to find out what other organizations are paying for roles. You're going to find out, maybe this organization is doing something interesting that you're not doing in your current workplace, and you could bring that idea forward, research that. So there's all sorts of market intelligence that you can uncover, and you get to make a friend, and you'll figure out who it is that you want to work with and build a relationship with. And that's one, after this, if Keith and Nada were to call me, years down the line, I'd say, my gosh, how can I help you? What career advice can I give you? And that's the best recruiters will do that for you.
Yeah, and I fully second that. And I would also, in the demystifying world too, I would say these also don't have to be long conversations. It can be a 5, 10. I know early on I always felt like, oh, I'm wasting someone's time. And really, you can be efficient with your time. And I would also put out there that it's a nice place to be, where you can also offer up individuals from your own network, friends, people you work with, who can be part of, that ongoing, virtuous cycle. So I always encourage people to also do that. We all get busy, but sometimes if there's ways to be helpful. that's how we build relationships. Keith, I wanted to go back to you. So it's been mentioned a couple times, sort of learning the vocabulary or learning some of the nuances of fundraising, coming from a different area. How did you go about trying to figure that out through your process and sort of make yourself an increasingly attractive candidate when you were having these interview conversations?
Well, I'm gonna tell you what was a real helpful thing for me, and that is I got a mentor who was in the fundraising business. So I got that, first of all, someone who could kind of orchestrate what I needed to do. So that's really what happened, and that helped me propel myself and better prepare myself. Because I mean, the resume I had, she says, to be honest, when I first met the lady, she was referred to me to be my mentor. It's like she interviewed me. It's like, wait a minute, I thought she was supposed to be my mentor and helping me, but she literally took me through an interview, and afterwards said, okay, she said, you know, you sound like you could be pretty convincing. However, there's some things that you need to learn. And that's when I looked up the class. I took the class because I needed to understand fundraising. In the church, we did capital campaigns, and I understood the process of segmenting out people, the higher income people, and, you know, sitting down with them and going over, you know, why have you supported the church? And, you know, here's what we're thinking of doing. What do you think about it? Can we count on you? You know, that process, and getting larger gifts that way. But there was a lot of other things that I didn't know and language I needed to learn. So I got a mentor who knew those things and then could orchestrate or tell me what I needed to do. And taking the class was one of the things. I'm you know, assertive and aggressive. I didn't have problems with people saying no. If you think about it, preachers get up there every Sunday and give their message, and people walk out the same way they came in after years. So that wasn't an issue. And then I had some success of developing additional business in the church. So I've been in business my whole career. So I already have that acumen of business. And it was like, take and get the language, understand what you need to do. The other thing that I learned that was very helpful, I talked to you about transferable skills. This business, what I found out in my little short tenure in this side of it on this platform, is still a relationship building business. That's how I've had success connecting with people, because it's a relationship building business. And then what we do, even at that level at church, you know, I help build a substantial church when it comes to revenue, but it's still transferable skills and it's scalable. And that's the whole key. It's a process that's scalable, meeting people, understanding, you know, why they give, and then being in this arena, we help people feel good about what they already are doing anyway. And so that was it. I learned it from my mentor, and since then, John, my mentor has told me to get additional mentors, and I also joined the Association of Professional Fundraisers, which was another great thing that I did. And so going to meetings, networking in there, people are so helpful. So even down to, here are some people you need to make sure you meet here in Houston, okay? And so people will help you if you just make yourself available. But that's really what I've done. Again, the networking, going around, hey, I'm new. One of the things that I had as a disadvantage, and my boss told me after my 6-month review, is I didn't think you could pull it off. But again, I wasn't from Houston. I moved here not knowing anyone. And how do you succeed in networking? Because in our business, knowing people is important. So I use those networks in the organization and the people that my mentor told me to meet. And of course, she helped me meet some people. And that's how I did it. So I would encourage, you know, anyone, you got to get 1 or 2 mentors. You got to have people that will feed into you, who will pour into you as a way of giving back. Otherwise,
that's a great point. And I feel like Adele's now going to be searching her network for all former preachers who she can help place. Teresa, can I ask you, what kind of questions do you like to hear candidates asking? What do you like to know that they're looking for? This conversation is really a two-way street.
Well, the worst thing that I've ever heard is somebody saying, I don't have any questions. That, I don't care how great the interview just went, we're done. Because we're also beyond a relationship building business. The way that you build relationships is through curiosity and asking questions. So if you don't have any, we're probably not going to get along. So I want to hear from, I guess the questions that jazz me up are the creative ones, or things that are the soft skill sides. You know, what is the culture like? Can you give me an example? I'm a Myers-Briggs S, so I like people who want examples. That jazzes me up. But we are also an experiential kind of profession, and so I want them to ask me questions that relate to the work, but also can be answered in a story, if you will. Because for me, that I like to give them illustration of whatever it is they're asking, so that I'm not giving them rote answers to rote questions. I cannot stand the rote questions either. And I always tell candidates, you know, friends of mine, if you ever get asked, and forgive me if you guys ask this, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Or give me your 3 strengths and weaknesses, get up and leave, because you're going to go to work for somebody who hasn't really mastered the art of interviewing. It should be a conversation. In fact, when I get people just to have a conversation, they often let down their guard and tell me much more about themselves, positively and sometimes negatively. It's killed their candidacy, and it also has enhanced it. So I think you have to be skilled as an interviewer as well on how to get information from people. And that tells me, again, they're interviewing me. It tells me how they might be with a prospect if it's a frontline position, if they can get me to chat.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think also worth sort of interjecting too as a candidate, because you're interviewing the organization as much as anything else, but really being clear with yourself on why you're making a move, what the position is. And, you know, there's different categories, and none are right or wrong. Sometimes it's growth, sometimes it's pure necessity, and you might not care at all what questions Teresa asks because you just need that job at that time. And that's okay at different times in people's lives. But just, I think for the candidates I've seen most successful, they're very clear-headed in sort of what they're looking for and sort of what they're open to. Neda, can I ask you sort of from both perspectives, because it sounds like you were thoughtful on this as a candidate, but also as you hire. You know, it does seem like there's a important I think movement where people are trying to get at culture, and particularly around DEI and sort of where organizations are in this space, both what they might have on their website and what the reality is. Did you have any ways that you sort of figured out how to bring those questions up in the interview process, or sort of how you've seen people who've been interviewing? Are they interested in this as you talk to them?
I have found both. I asked what kind of initiatives the organization had in that area, but I had also researched what they were doing, and so my questions were always more pointed. They were not just what are you doing, but how is that going? How is that you know, that program, or how is that particular effort happening? And it just showed that I had done some of the homework, but also you want to, DEI sort of such a big space, and let's face it, a lot of organizations, they're all at different points. Some of them are just starting the conversation, some of them are refining a plan, etc. And so but engaging in that conversation was part of my process, and I personally found it useful. It helped me to kind of tell culture, which is what I was very interested in learning about. in terms of the candidates, I am seeing a lot of candidates also, if not ask about it, be very well educated on it as well. I think it's part of mission. Even if the political climate doesn't support a lot of these conversations, nonprofits continue to draw people that care about ideas and about values and about the well-being of society, and they want to feel that they're part of something that's making a difference. So it has come up in those conversations as well, and it's we've also found people that are actually increasingly putting oh, I'm part of this committee in their resumes. You know, they're kind of talking about their volunteering experience and their service as part of being in an organization. So which is another nice data point, because it tells you that there's somebody that's engaged in their job, not just clocking it. They're engaged in what's happening in the organization. So that's a nice piece too.
Thank you, Neda. And we will go to questions in a sec, but I do want to circle and let Adele. You see this sort of a bit more broadly, and you have to advise sort of your folks on a topic that can, is both very important and can make people a little bit cautious too. So what would you share on this topic?
Yeah, it's interesting. As I've been listening to everyone speak, I am reminded that so first I want to say there are multiple stages of an interview process, right? So when you first start out, people are going to want to know, can you do this job? And you're going to get the questions about, like, draw the parallels from what you've been doing to what this job needs, or tell me about the gifts that you've brought in. And they're going to go from the very functional and technical, and they're going to start to move up to what Nate and Teresa are mentioning, like the competencies and a more sophisticated understanding of how you problem solve. Inside of all of that, you're going to meet with different people who sit in different areas of almost of the university, of any organization, and they will be at different levels. And these DEI questions, you want to ask them repeatedly, because everyone is going to have a different lived experience inside of that organization. And it really helps when you run into someone who's cleaning the bathroom, to the receptionist who's walked you into the conference room, to the person who's going to be your boss or your boss's boss. They're all going to have a different answer to the, tell me where you are in your DEI journey. And you can start with a really broad question like that, or you can get really focused to ask, what DEI training has my supervisor had, and who is holding them accountable? Oof, that's a huge one. If that doesn't tell you something there, it allows you to go in with your eyes wide open. I don't pay attention to LinkedIn posts that say, happy whatever the holiday is, because I think that could be performative, right? You can hide behind that. Why don't you ask to see their benefits? Take a look at the vacation schedule. Are they just off for Christmas? That might tell you something. If you're looking for Hanukkah, if you're looking for Juneteenth, if you're looking for Indigenous Peoples Day and it's not there, that could tell you something. And it doesn't mean you don't continue interviewing or you don't take the job. It means you go in with your eyes wide open. But I think, asking about where are you on this DEI journey? What is diversity, equity, inclusion mean to you? How do you create a sense of belonging on your team? What does your commitment mean? How are you living that? Asking some of those really pointed questions will help open that up. And if you are working with a recruiter, you can ask them early on in the conversation to talk to the culture. They should be able to answer some of those questions for you. I always tell people, don't believe a word the recruiter says. Keep asking the same questions as you move through the process. But again, the best recruiters will also tell you, you know what, this is a tough environment. You may, if you are Black, Indigenous, a person of color, a woman, any of a protected class, you may not want to be here for ABC reasons. And if it is a recruiter that you trust, you may want to take heed, because we don't want you to feel burdened. If you don't want to carry that burden, don't carry the burden. You really want to make sure that you're narrowing down into those cultures that you really belong in. I could go on for days on this, but I'm going to stop there.
No, thank you. And I'm so appreciative of the candor and just sort of the thoughtfulness. And, and again, we eyes wide open. So there's people who take jobs for all sorts of reasons, and there's no judgment on any of that. It is just making sure that you are clear-eyed in what's going on. Let me pause here. If there are any questions, it's a little bit hard in this format, but there is a chat, Sarah. I don't know if you're seeing anything or if anyone wants to raise their hand.
Yeah, so we have one question that came in, and I'll just say for anyone that would like a question answered, please use your questions box on the right-hand side of your panel, and we'll be sure to answer that. So first question here, maybe some advice for Jared here. He says, between gaining 500 connections on LinkedIn, building contacts from scratch in a new field, finding a mentor in a field where you may know nobody, and having lucky enough to have a cover letter written that gets past the ATS system, it seems like this is a hopeless path for a career changer. I hold a PhD from BU, but would it make sense for me to go back to get an undergraduate degree in business to start from scratch, as transitioning into this new field doesn't seem realistically possible? Does anyone have any insights for him?
Can I share? Because it sounds like, that's just where I am or was. No, just learn to pull out those transferable skills. If you understand what fundraising is, relationship building, and when you get to know people and they trust you as a person in your conversation, you can make that next move and make the ask. But I think what we do is try to over impress people with our credentials and all of that stuff, instead of doing what you do in communications is asking questions. Let people talk about themselves. When they talk about themselves, they'll feel better. You'll learn the questions that you need to ask to get to where you're trying to go. But going back for more education, that just gives you more degrees. Just learn to hone those skill sets that you have that helps you cultivate and build those relationships. That's what I would suggest.
And just because I'll let you comment too, and just because I can't help myself. While another undergraduate degree may not help, there are certain packages of education, whether it be a conference or a course or certificate program, where you can get some of these elements, the network, the mentor, the language, that can be helpful in sort of focusing. Not everyone can start from scratch and sort of build that out. So I would say to think about those sorts of things as well. Adele.
I would offer, you may want to pull out a map and draw a circle around a 10-mile radius of your house and look at what nonprofits are there and what missions are interesting to you, and call them and ask to volunteer, because volunteering puts you in the way of a new position. You're going to be able to network with board members, with the staff that's there. You're going to get education that you won't have to pay for at school, and they will get to know you. You'll become visible in your community, and that is another way to kind of start connecting those dots. When a position opens up, you're going to be the first person that they look to.
And Sarah,
Amen.
Thanks, Lisa. We got another preacher here. Look at us go. We have a theme. Sarah, I saw the other question around mentoring, and what I might do is maybe when we send the follow-up link to this, we can also provide, we did do a webinar a little while back on mentoring specifically, as that's something that we've all found to be helpful in our careers and personal lives, and something we bake into this program. But I think with that question and watching time, I'd like to, Sarah, if you want to wrap us, and then I will share a final thought at the end.
Sure thing. All right, so I would just like to say thank you to our panelists, of course, for bringing great insights to our discussion here. We're now just going to briefly turn the page to some BU program information for those who might be interested in our program. So one moment here. Okay. So our program schedule, for those interested in learning more about registering, is held 3 times a year, and that's every January, May, and September. And so our fall enrollment cycle is coming up, and the deadline is August 25th, and class does begin on September 5th. The tuition for the program is here, $2,495. And a couple of our instructors are here on the call. That's Nada and Teresa. So of course, we welcome anyone to ask questions about that directly. And if you have any questions about the program or the enrollment process, we have a great team of advisors that are happy to help and can be contacted at the information displayed here, the telephone number, website, email, and there is live chat on the website as well if you prefer that method.
And let me just say a big thank you to Adele, Keith, Nada, and Teresa, and Sarah. This is incredibly important work. I could have been here all afternoon. I learned a ton. This is, you know, I have a deep feeling towards learning from practice, and I could not think of a more practical group to get together. And I think the way that we all better ourselves, whether it be through mentors or education or questions or volunteering, is to learn from people who are actually out there doing it. So thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for the great work you do out in the world. And I look forward to our paths all crossing again soon. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. All right.